Okay, let's just share screen. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start off going through a midrash. It won't be the whole one, but it's sort of the basics. So Reb Yudin said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the behemoth, which is referring to this shor habari, this ox, and the leviathan, this fish, will be gain for the righteous in the world to come. The world to come here is referring to when Moshiach comes. And when he said it'll be a game, it means like a circus. And then it continues. How are they slaughtered? So the Midrash says that the behemoth, referring to the shor habari, galls the leviathan with its horns and shreds it. And the leviathan impales the behemoth with its fins and slaughters it. This somehow happens simultaneously. So now the rabbis ask a question. How can you do shechita with fins? Fins are serrated. You cannot use a knife or an implement that is serrated to do shechita. So he continues. The sages ask, is this a kosher slaughtering? The Mishnah states, all may slaughter, and with any implement. So any Jewish person can do shechita, and he can use anything, except with like a sickle, because it's rounded, a saw, serrated, teeth or fingernails, since these strangle. Reb Avin said in the name of Bar Kahana, so he responds as follows, that it says, a verse, Torah Chadasha Me'iti Tesa, that a new Torah will come forth from me. So even though today you cannot use fins to do shechita, serrated, and it's like a saw. However, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a new dimension to Torah. Now, I just need to clarify. There is not going to be a new Torah. The same Shulchan Aruch that we've had until now is going to continue. So there's going to be kosher, there's going to be everything what we're doing till now will continue. Two people there. Okay, so everything's going to continue. However, we've mentioned the other week that Eliyahu Navi is going to one of the achievements, or one of the tasks of Eliyahu Navi is to teach us Torah on a much deeper level. He's going to teach us Torah that we've never learned before. A, his understanding is going to be so developed, and B, he's been around for such a long time that he's accumulated so much knowledge. So when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a whole new depth and Torah knowledge, and somehow from this depth of Torah knowledge, they'll come to the conclusion that you can do shechita on this shor habar with this leviathan, with the fins of this fish. Right, so we have a source in the Midrash about this meal. Now, when you finish a meal, you have to do brachat hamazon. If you have 3 people, 3 men together, then you do mezuzah. Someone leads the benching. If you have 10 people, someone leads the benching and says the word Elokeinu. You mentioned God's name. So we're going to read a little bit further. It's on page 66. All right, this is from the Talmud. I have it on the screen, and it goes as follows. in the future, God will prepare a feast for the righteous on the day that he extends his mercy to the descendants of Isaac. And we understand that this will be when Mashiach comes. Exactly when, yet to be confirmed. I assume at some point after the coming of Mashiach. So he says, after they eat and drink, the celebrants will give Abraham, our father, a cup of blessing to recite the blessing. Right? So Abraham, I suppose he's the patriarch, literally, of the Jewish people. He will be given the cup of wine to lead Birchat HaMazon. So I just want to point out that after Mashiach's coming, there's an argument when the resurrection will be, when Tchias HaMesim will be. There's an opinion that it will take about 40 years from when Mashiach comes and builds the Beis HaMikdash, and all the Jews come together and we sort of reunite in Israel. It'll take about 40 years for the resurrection to happen. And the idea is, as I said before, that when Mashiach comes, negative energy will go. Therefore, once all the negative energy has gone, then we have all the people who have passed away will be resurrected. They'll come back because there's no reason for them not to be around anymore. However, the people we need right away, they will have their resurrection. Tchias HaMesim will happen as soon as Mashiach comes. So, for example, Moshe and Aaron, we need them to tell us how to run the service in the Beis HaMikdash. So they will come back right away. And I think Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they'll also come back straight away. So here by this party, after they finish the meal, Abraham's going to be offered to recite Birchat HaMazon. And Abraham will say, I will not recite the blessing, for the wicked Ishmael came from me. So even though I'm a big tzaddik, right, I'm not denying that. However, there's certain negativity that came out from me, so therefore I'm not going to need the Birchat HaMazon. So Abraham will offer it to Isaac. Take the cup and recite the blessing. Isaac will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as the wicked Esau came from me. All right, so Isaac then offers it to Jacob. So he offers it to Jacob, and Jacob says, I will not recite the blessing, as I married two sisters in their lifetime, and the Torah would later forbid them to me. So even though at that point it wasn't a problem, but since once the Torah is given, it will be forbidden. So Jacob will say to Moses, take the cup and then recite the blessing. You do Birchat HaMazon. So Moses will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as I did not merit to enter Israel, neither in my life nor in my death. So Moshe says to Yeshua, to Joshua, you take the cup and recite the blessing. And Joshua will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as I did not merit to have a son. So it continues, and eventually Joshua will say to King David, take the cup and recite the blessing. So David will say to them, I will recite the blessing, as it's fitting for me to recite the blessing, as it's stated, and we say it's the Motzei Shabbat, Kos Yeshuos Esau V'Shem Hashem Ekra. I will lift up the cup of salvation, and I will call upon the name of God. Right? So we have here sort of a description of how it's going to, a certain component of the meal, the grace after meals, who's going to get to do Birchat HaMazon. Now, what's special about King David? King David is sort of the closest to Mashiach. Mashiach is the one who's doing the final redemption, uniting all the Jews, bringing us all to Israel, building the Beit HaMikdash. King David is the one that sort of did that, actually build the Beit HaMikdash. But he sort of the Jews together, and he acquired the land for the Beis Hamikdash. He acquired the materials for the Beis Hamikdash. He got everything together. Now, it's very fitting, A, that he is the patriarch of Mashiach, and B, he had a similar life experience to what Mashiach is supposed to achieve. So he's the one who ends up doing Birkat Hamazon. Now this food, how does it get divided? So some of the rabbis say as follows: people who fulfilled mitzvot primarily with their legs will get to eat from the leg of the animal. Someone who was involved in other parts of the body, then he'll get those body parts of the animal. People who are particular with the mitzvah of shechita, to make sure that the meat they ate was slaughtered properly according to proper halacha, then they will partake in this meal. Okay, so we've got different sources from the Midrash and the Talmud that this meal actually is a real thing and it's going to take place. But when we read through the Midrash and sometimes the Talmud, some of the stories are far-fetched. Sometimes you read a story and say, this can't have happened. In fact, you can have two rabbis who will say a story, but each one will say it different. Now, it could only happen in one way. So how are they arguing in a reality situation? Is it going to happen like this, or is it going to happen like this? So there are many people who are of the opinion that various stories in the Midrash and the Talmud didn't actually happen, or they're not actually going to happen. They're just analogies for something else, or they're just there to teach us a life experience, what we should do and what we shouldn't do. So the Maimonides,
I'm saying the Talmud as well. Oh, really?
Right, page 68, he says like this: the good beyond which there can be other good, this was the good designed by the prophets. So the Maimonides, in his book Mishnah Torah, talks about Mashiach towards the beginning of his works and then again towards the end. So in the beginning part, in Hilchos Teshuvah, he writes as follows: the sages refer to this good which is prepared for the righteous by the metaphor of feast. So this part of the Rambam, he's saying that this party of the Livyasan and Shor Habar with his fish and with this animal, the meat, it's just a analogy, a metaphor for the good that's going to happen. So food represents plentiful, represents taste, represents really enjoying. So that's what the Rambam says that the when we talk about this meal, it's just referring to a analogy for the good. However, over here, there are other texts in the Rambam which they discuss a real meal. So even the Maimonides seems to be of the opinion that the meal is going to be a real meal. And how do they sort out here where it says it's just a metaphor for good? So they come up with the following solution: that possibly there'll be two meals. There's a meal that the Rambam's talking about over here on the screen. That's just a metaphor. However, there will actually be a real meal at some point. Right, and then the next source, he says the following: know this, right? It's on the screen, it's on page 68, text 4. We ought to believe all these matters in their simple, literal sense. Right, so this Rav Shmuel HaLevi says it's the Marshal, I think, he says that you have to take it in the literal sense. Though many commentaries interpret it in various ways, they do not supplant the plain meaning. Later on, towards the end of the class, we're going to see from the Maharal of Prague. He explains the whole idea of the Shoy HaBor and the Leviathan, this meat and this fish, and this whole meal as a metaphor for something else, which we're going to get to later on. So we have sources that this meal is going to happen in the Medrash and the Talmud. We have an argument between different rabbis and commentaries, whether it's a literal meal or not literal meal. It seems to be that it is, by most people hold, that it is actually a literal meal. Now we're going to go through some sources about the menu. Okay, so the first item on our menu, here we are, is the fish. Then we've got this ox, this animal, and then we have the wine. So in the beginning of creation, on the 5th day, one of the items and one of the fish creatures that God created, it uses the word taninim. And taninim, we're told, is the Leviathan. All right, so Rashi, the commentary Rashi on the Talmud, on the Chumash, so Rashi on the Chumash, when you get to this word taninim, right in the beginning of creation, on the 5th day of creation, he says taninim is this, he gives two explanations. One, it means very big fish, and the other explanation is that it is this Leviathan. So it's not like a myth that people talk about there's going to be this Leviathan. Right? We've got Rashi explaining the Chumash that this word taninim, created right in the beginning of creation, 5,781 years ago, is this Leviathan fish. In the scriptures, going through Chumash and Nach, we have the Leviathan actually written 5 times. It's mentioned by name, Leviathan, and also in Tehillim is mentioned twice. Okay? In fact, it says that once, there's a midrash that says the following: once God created the world, how does he occupy himself? So I think it's the Talmud, and it says that God is the Talmud. God says God divides his day into 3. I think 1/3 of the day he's helping make shidduchim, matches, helping people get married, engaged. I think 1/3 of the day he's studying Torah, and 1/3 of the day he's playing with the Leviathan fish. So we're going to read soon that this Leviathan fish is so big, if it would mate, then all these big fish being born would just drown out the oceans. They would consume all the fish. It would be, it affect the ecosystem in a major way. So God got rid of one of the fish, one of the Leviathans. He got rid of it. So there's one Leviathan left. And God has compassion for every creature in this world. So the Leviathan, even though it's lonely, God spends 1/3 of his time occupying and playing and entertaining this Leviathan fish. They should not get bored. All right, that's a story in I think it's in the Talmud. Let's see over here. This is Rabbi Yehuda in the Talmud says the following. All right, Yehuda said in the name of Rav, page 69, text 5, and it's on the screen as well. Everything that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in His world, He created male and female. Even Leviathan, and He calls it the rod serpent, and Leviathan, the tortoise serpent, He created male and female. Now the issue is, had they had children, had they coupled and produced offspring, they would have destroyed the entire world, because their the children would have been so big, there would have been so many, it would just got rid of everything else, just pushed everything out. So what did he do? So he castrated the male and he killed the female. Why did he have to castrate the male? So number one, it shouldn't mate with other fish. They will have the same problem. And also it shouldn't have the urges. He hasn't got his female, hasn't got Mrs. Leviathan. So therefore he shouldn't have the urge to want to be together with his partner. And then it says, Hashem salted the female to preserve it for the banquet for the righteous in the future. As it states, and he will slay the serpent that is in the sea. Okay? Then the Talmud says, it's not on the screen, but the Talmud says another few points about this Leviathan fish. It sits in the Yam HaGadol. Now, very often the Yam HaGadol is referring to the Mediterranean Sea, and sometimes it's referring to the big oceans. And it feeds off the runoff of the Jordan River. The breath it emits when hungry is enough to boil the entire sea. When he's thirsty, he drinks from the sea, leaving a crater in the seabed so deep that it does not refill until 70 years later. So whether this is actual description of the Leviathan or it's just metaphoric saying how enormous this fish is, but it's a pretty big fish. And then it says, it's so mighty, this fish, that even the angels are afraid to battle with it. Nothing can harm it until the Shar Habar alone, when Moshiach comes, will be able to kill this fish. Then it says, from its skin, Hashem will make a sukkah that will be used when Moshiach comes. It says, Kol Yisrael ru'oin leishem sukkah achas. All Jewish people are fit to sit in one sukkah. A sukkah has a minimum height, it has a maximum height, it has a minimum area space. It does not have a maximum area space. So you can have a massive, massive sukkah, as long as you've got 2 or 3 walls, and you've got the schach to cover it with. When Mashiach comes, it says Hashem will take the skin of the Leviathan, make a massive sukkah, and all the Jewish people together in this sukkah. Now we mentioned that one of these Leviathans was killed right in the beginning of creation. And it says that the skin was used for Adam and Eve. So once they ate from the forbidden fruit, they became aware that they weren't wearing clothes. So Hashem made them clothes from the skin of the Leviathan. And also it says that Yaakov had clothes when he went into his father Yitzchak. One of the opinions that these clothes were made from the Leviathan. Okay? And then another thing with this fish, it has sort of spiritual qualities in it. So a certain refinement, a certain spiritual quality within it. So these are details about this fish, this Leviathan fish. Now let's move on to this animal called the Shor Habar. Shor means an ox. Habar, I'm not sure what the translation is. What we mentioned beforehand, when we referred to it, was called the behemoth. Right? In Tehillim also is referred to as behemoth. It's a massive animal of some sort. Now there is an opinion that Hashem destroyed the female counterpart of the Shor Habar as well. There is a medrash that says it does have a counterpart, so there's a Mrs. Shor Habar, not just Mr. Shor Habar, but he does not have any desire to mate with it. Again, it's the massive animal. It consumes a phenomenal amount of food, and also it's supposed to have very good flesh, very good meat, very tasty and good meat. Right? So that's about this show habar. Then we have something called the yayin hamashuma, which is preserved wine. And it's been preserved for a very long time. How old do you think this wine is? So on page 70, we have from the Talmud. It says that the righteous are going to get rewarded. So it says, what is this reward which is stated? No eye has seen it, right? A special reward never been seen before. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, this is the wine that's been preserved in its grapes since the 6 days of creation, and which no eye has ever seen it. So as before we had sell-by dates on, or best before dates, this wine is 5,781 years old. It's from the 6 days of creation. And this wine has been put away and preserved, and we will get it when Moshiach comes. Okay, so this is all different sources. Now, it could be it's all metaphoric, it could be it's all actual and real. But again, we've got this sort of kaleidoscope of different opinions and different ideas. So what I want to do now is explain a little bit what this meal is all about. Yeah, when Moshiach comes, why do we have to eat? Why do we have this big meal? And why is it going to consist of these three components? So, one thought is as follows. When Mashiach comes, we're going to reach this perfection, this utopia. God created a perfect world, but then through various sins, forbidden fruit and different things, there's negative energy mixed in to the world, and our job is to bring out the positive energy within the world. So the true essence of everything is Hashem that keeps it going, and our job is to bring out its true purpose, so that the physical world should merge and become one with the spiritual world. Through all our efforts, throughout all generations, throughout our whole life, we'll appreciate and be in tune and see and enjoy the fruits of our labor and the fruits of the labor of all previous generations. So the world will reach a state of perfection. So therefore, this perfection is represented by these dishes, the Shor Habar and the Leviathan, which is, we said before, the choicest fish, the choicest meat, the choicest wine. Therefore, it makes sense to sit down to a choicest meal, the best meal that you can have. We would be through so much exile, so much stress, so much hardship. Mashiach has come, breathe a sigh of relief. We now sit down and just breathe in and absorb the beauty, the tranquility of Mashiach's time, again by having this meal, which is the perfect food. And there's one person we want to show gratitude to, and that is King David. Because he's the one that sort of brought the Jews, I said before, he brought the Jews together. He fought off the Pelishtim and the other nations who were trying to stop the Jews settling in Israel at that time. And he's the one who got the Beis Hamikdash together. All right, so let's see here. This is from the Maharal. So it's text 7 on page 72. And he says as follows: this world is not meant to be a unified, perfect world until Mashiach comes. In other words, we are still on the journey. We have not reached the destination yet. So if we struggle, that's normal. That's how God designed the world. If we struggle spiritually, and you're torn, should I eat a kosher sandwich, non-kosher sandwich, Shabbos, non-Shabbos, tzedakah, not tzedakah, This is normal. So if you have these struggles, you should know you're a normal person. Because we're now on the journey and we're on this battle. When Mashiach comes, then there'll be no war. Rather, there'll be a unified world without any division or fragmentation. This then is the idea of the future banquet. Banquet means reward for enduring the tremendous suffering of exile. Receiving this reward is called banquet. And the Maral is of the opinion, and he says, this banquet is not a physical thing, rather a time to receive reward, which can be called banquet. Right, so if he's continuing on this theme, he says, in line with this, the participants of this banquet offer a cup to Abraham to recite grace. For every meal is followed with blessing. For a person out to thank Hashem, the source of all blessing. And he says there were no other tzaddikim like David, because all others possessed a certain deficiency. This does not detract them from their greatness. To the contrary, they were so great that it was only inevitable that their greatness would entail some sort of deficiency. David, by contrast, had no deficiency, and thus he is best suited to recite grace. King David was similar to the future King Moshiach, which is why Moshiach will descend from him. David and Moshiach share the theme of bringing the world to perfection, which is the principal quality of future times. Okay? So this is the Maral's take on this idea of this meal. That it represents perfection, or time of perfection. It represents the time for us to receive our reward from all the effort that we put in throughout all these years of exile. And it's a chance just to catch our breath after the hardships of exile. So we're going to have this reward, which is alluded to with the name of banquet. So that's why one item on the menu is wine. Wine represents the secrets of Torah. It says, Nichnas yayin yotza sod. When you ingest wine, you drink wine, or at least enough of it, all the secrets come out. So that's why you mustn't have too much to drink. The person always has to be in control of themselves. And if a person is drunk, obviously they're not in control. So a person who drinks too much, the secrets come out. If a person is full of positive information, so when you get intoxicated, positive information will come out. If you're full of negative information, or negative way of speaking, when you drink too much, and it loosens your tongue, as it says, then negative will come out. But wine is the idea of secrets. So we're going to drink, when Mashiach comes, this wine, which the message over here is that the secrets of Torah will come out. Deep Kabbalistic teachings, which you said before, Torah Chadasham Ititese, a new dimension of Torah. It won't be a new Torah, but the new dimension of Torah will come. In fact, the Rambam says we will occupy our time with the knowledge, absorbing the knowledge of Hashem. It will be available, A, and B, will be receptacles to understand what these secrets are. If we were to walk into a kollel and open these mystical books of Kabbalistic teachings, it's going to be way over our heads. When Mashiach comes, our minds will open up, our hearts will open up, we'll be able to absorb it and understand it, and that's represented by this wine, the Yain HaMeshuma of wine. Now, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, he says there'll be two dimensions to this meal. We're going to have, as Maral says, in a metaphoric way, but we'll actually have it in a real, tangible way. So let's just see what he says. which is on page 74, text 8. It's on the screen. The future banquet for the righteous will be experienced on two levels. One as a simple meal, and another will be a spiritual opportunity to uncover the secrets of Torah, as explained in the Zohar. And he says, they are both true. For more ordinary people, those conception of pleasure is limited to the material will be a physical meal. For the righteous, whose conception of pleasure is secrets of Torah, the meal will be an opportunity to uncover the great wonders of the Torah. All right, so he says people experience on two dimensions. If you are more material centric, then you'll enjoy the material physical meal. If you're more mystical centric, Kabbalistic centric, then you'll have it in its Kabbalistic way. Now, so this is the Maral's take on this meal. The Alter Rebbe, Rav Shneur Zalman, the first Rebbe of Chabad, he explains that the fish, the Leviathan, and the Shor HaBor, the animal, they represent two types of people, or two ways to serve Hashem. And these two ways we see more by tzaddikim than by regular lay people. So one example, we're going to get in extremes. So one example, one extreme, is Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Reb Shimon bar Yochai wrote the Zohar. He's also one of the Tanoim, one of the people who wrote the Mishnah, and very often you're going to find Reb Shimon all over the Mishnah quoted. And he had a son, Rabbi Eliezer. And they lived at the time of the Romans who had conquered or were around Israel. And they forbade studying Torah, they forbade a lot of stuff, and they made the life of Jews really hard. And the story is that the rabbis were having just a discussion, maybe the chilling over coffee, I don't know, and having a discussion. One fellow says that the Romans are so kind to us, they built good roads, they built nice bridges, and they built bathhouses, and they're really good to us. One person kept quiet, and another person, Rav Shimon bar Yochai, he says, no, they only built it for their own benefits. They built the roads and the bridges so that they can charge us tolls. They're not here to enhance our infrastructure and our life. Just, it's a way to make money. This conversation got back to the Romans. They weren't very happy with Reb Shimon, and they wanted to kill him. So in the beginning, he hid somewhere, and his wife would bring him food every day, but then he started following his wife. So in the end, he disappeared for 12, 13 years with a son, Rebbe Eliezer, and they hid in a cave. And a miracle happened that a stream opened up in front of the cave so they have what to drink, and a carob tree grew, and that's why he ate, and that's what they drank for those 12, 13 years. While they were in this cave, they studied Torah. But they did not have any physical objects. They had their clothes that they were very careful to preserve it. So in fact, they buried themselves. They actually took off their clothes to preserve it, and they buried themselves in sand to keep themselves covered. But they didn't have to fill in. They didn't have matzah. They didn't have a lulav. All the items, didn't have a mezuzah, Sefer Torah, all the items we need in order to do the mitzvahs, they did not have. They were stuck somewhere. And they couldn't call someone to bring it to them because that person would be followed and then the Romans would find them. So how did they perform mitzvahs? So we're taught they perform mitzvahs in a spiritual way. When we perform a mitzvah, it's not just a ritual that we're doing. It's actually an act of intimacy with Hashem. Hashem says, you can connect with me by lighting a Shabbat candle. You can connect by me by affixing a mezuzah on your doorpost. You connect by me by eating a kosher sandwich. When you eat a kosher sandwich, you draw down spiritual energy, godly energy, both for yourself and for the world at large. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his son were so spiritually in tune, they were so godly, that they just did the mitzvahs in their spiritual form rather than the physical form. Now, regular people, even most tzaddikim, the way they perform or we perform a mitzvah is by engaging with the physical object. Which is the better way of serving Hashem? Anyone? So the answer is, if you're a tzaddik like Rosh Shimon Bar Yochai, then maybe the best way for you to serve Hashem is by doing it just in a spiritual way.
Tzaddik who wrote the Zohar and his son were 13 years hid in a cave. They couldn't perform any physical mitzvahs. Right.
Yeah, so they did the mitzvahs in a spiritual way.
They lived in a more refined spiritual world where they were able to do spiritual mitzvahs. I don't really understand it because the whole point of the mitzvahs is that it's something that we do for earth.
It seems to be a way of squaring.
Yeah,
so which is a better way to serve Hashem?
Each according to his position.
Energy, or to actually get involved with the physical, material objects that we have here in this world and draw down the spiritual energy that way. So I believe the answer is that if you're a tzaddik like Rosh Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rebbe Eliezer, then for you, it's a way, an option, a good way to serve Hashem just in a spiritual way. For everyone else, even if you're a big tzaddik, you need to engage in the material world in order to draw down the spiritual energy to refine and develop the world. So we need a real sukkah. We need a, we need everything in this physical way.
Deed is more important than anything in Yiddishkeit. Above everything is deed.
So I've mentioned before, to you diamonds, you want to get diamonds out of the coal mine?
Tzaddik who cut himself off from.
You need to go into the mine, into the coal mine, the mine face, I think it's called. You go all the way into the mine, and then you can mine out the diamonds. You're going to get dirty. You're going to end up with a black face and black hands and get covered in muck, because that's the only way to get these diamonds out. And that's the idea how we perform mitzvahs. We go into the field is dirty, the field can be muddy. We're going to get our hands and face covered with muck. But that's how we bring out the diamonds. That's how we bring up the produce. That's how we draw down God's divine energy. So the fish, the Leviathan fish, and the Shor Habori, this animal, this ox, represent these two ways of serving Hashem. The fish lives in the sea. Anything in the sea is concealed. You stand by the pier, you stand on the side of the sea, you cannot see what's happening underneath. There's a whole empire under the water. If you go to Eilat, you go underwater, scuba diving, you can see all the beautiful colored fish. You can see there's hills and mountains and the water there. But when you stand on dry land, you don't see this whole world, a whole active world underneath the sea. So the sea represents a more spiritual dimension, a more spiritual plane. In Hebrew, it's called Alma de Iskasia, the hidden, concealed world. So me as a human being, my reality is what I can see, is what's tangible, what's physical. Something spiritual, that's concealed, I can't see it. So we have this idea, when Hashem gave us, when we passed through So when we went through the Yam Suf, so the sea became dry land. So we taught that the sea represents the hidden world, the concealed world, the spiritual worlds. It became dry land. For the Jews at that point, it became tangible. It became real. They could relate to godliness. That was the big deal of going through the Red Sea, the Yam Suf. The same idea we have here. The fish represents those tzaddikim. Like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, their whole life is a spiritual, godly life. They do not engage in the material world. By Reb Shimon is called Teirasoi Umnasoi. Torah is his life. So I know in Israel today, there's something called Torah Umnasoi means that you're a student of Torah and you could be exempt from the army or national service for that time while you're studying Torah. But the Rebbe explains, Torah Umnasoi does not mean you learn Torah the whole day. It means within your soul, you're such a person who's not involved in the material world, you're totally involved in the spiritual godly world, like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So that's who the Levyasan fish represents. Then you have the ox. An ox that just wants to eat. An ox represents a coarse life of toiling the world, the field. The ox pulls the plow. He's the one that turns over the earth and makes it productive, makes it fertile, makes that it can grow. So these two tzaddikim will merge together. These two ways of serving Hashem will merge together. So let's see here. Page 76. Let's just go. There we are. Text 9, and I'm going to put it onto the screen. This is from Reb Shneur Zalman, the first Rebbe of Chabad. He says, there are two types of tzaddikim. The hidden ones, whose religious service is spiritual in nature, namely with the intent of spiritual unifications. That means, in simple terms, that they serve Hashem just in the spiritual way. They're not involved in the material part of keeping mitzvot. And he brings an example of Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in a cave for 13 years, was one such tzaddik. While there, he certainly couldn't fulfill any mitzvah. After all, he lived off a carob tree and a stream created especially for him. He couldn't eat matzah on Passover. He could not make kiddush on wine, nor shake a lulav and esrog on sukkahs. Then you have regular people or regular tzaddikim. The second type of tzaddik are those in plain view. They engage with material matter, performing physical mitzvot, which also draws down intense godly energy. And now he's relating this to our menu, the fish and the meat. Now the former tzaddik, called the creatures of the sea, climbs to dizzying heights, like fish that swim swiftly from one end of the sea to the other. These tzaddikim swiftly to greater heights than those who work with material, bogged down as they are with lowly matter. In future times, the Levyasan will buckle the Shar Habar and slaughter it with his fins. The second type of tzaddik is represented by the Shar Habar, whose engagement with material matter is obviously not simply to fill their bellies with meat and revel in it, God forbid, rather to sublime it. They want to spiritualize the food, namely to fuel a passionate rejoicing with Hashem. Inasmuch as their path is inferior to the spiritual tzaddik, the Levyasan will thus slaughter the Shar Habar, namely she will elevate it. So what's going to happen here? They'll merge together. Not that one slaughters and kills the other to push it down, but rather when they slaughter or kill each other, they're elevating it and unifying with it and becoming one with it, and sort of impressing their way of serving Hashem on the other animal. So that leaves us as follows. These two tzaddikim, or these two models of tzaddikim, is not just for ancient tzaddikim like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived a couple of thousand years ago. In our life today, we can have these two personalities. We can have these two dimensions. True, most of the time, most of our life, we're engaged with the mundane world. That's by design, and nothing wrong with it. But there are times that we are spiritualized. We feel within us a pull towards Hashem. It comes from somewhere, don't know where. But sometimes we have this arousal, we have this feeling, I want to get closer to Hashem, I want to engage in a more spiritual way than I am. And the reason is because we have both these two ideas. So true, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai could sit for 13 years, day and night, totally in a spiritual trance, a spiritual way. We shouldn't fool ourselves thinking I'm going to be like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. But the reality is, during the course of our life, during the course of the year, there can be times that we are spiritually sensitive, we're godly sensitive, godly centric. And when that happens, grab it and relish it for that time, relish that experience. And most of the time, we are actually involved on the front line, on the coal face, on the diamond mine face, hewing, getting out these diamonds. We're going to get dirty on the way. We'll end up with dirty hands and a black face. However, we are going to bring up these diamonds, polish them, and present them to the Almighty. So, when we eat a sandwich, you're doing the work while the world was created. You're doing the work while you were created, and you're doing the work while the sandwich was created, because it's a kosher sandwich. You make a bracha before you eat it and after you eat it, and you're using the energy to serve Hashem. So, what is Mashiach all about? That period of Mashiach is the conclusion of the reason why the world was created. Why was the world created? God made a world that superficially looks independent, and our job is to utilize the material physical world, that it should engage and become one with Hashem. That everything we have, everything we come into contact with, we need to use it in a way that is what Hashem wants to be done now with it. Some things are very easy. You have a piece of matzah, one second, you have a piece of matzah on the first night of Pesach, you eat it with the brachos and so on, then you spiritualize that matzah. To fill in mezuzah, a kosher sandwich, you spiritualize it. When Mashiach comes, we'll see this being fulfilled. We'll see all the spiritual energy that's been developed over all these years. But that's the destination. The journey is through me eating that kosher sandwich. So when Mashiach comes, and we'll see on the one hand the work we put in through spiritualizing the physical, and we'll also tap into the spiritual experiences that we had during the course of our lifetime. That is the merging of the sea creature and the ox, the animal. Jonathan, you want to say something? No, all right, I thought you put your hand up. So let's go on to page 78, and I can put it onto the screen. Over here. Here we go. The Leviathan slaughtering the Shor HaBarim is the sum total of our entire work during exile of transforming the world. Then the ultimate power of our religious devotion will be revealed, namely that the loftiest levels of godliness, like the Leviathan of the hidden world, will be exposed in the manner of the Shor HaBarim in a revealed way. So when the Shor HaBarim, which represents the mundane, and the Leviathan, the fish, the sea creature, that represents the concealed world, the godly world, they merge together, what will happen, similar to the splitting of the sea, that what is usually concealed, godliness, will become revealed and tangible like a piece of steak, like a piece of meat. So far clear? Any questions? So either put you all to sleep or it's clear. All right, let's move on. A few more points. All right, a few more points. Let me just put it on the screen. So we've got here Rab Shmuel Yitzchak Dov Taberfeld. He wrote many books. One is called Zichron Shmuel. And he says that the Shor HaBor, the animal, and the Leviathan, the fish, they represent two approaches to serving Hashem. One is the approach of love, drawing closer to Hashem. One is the approach of yira, fear, and awe, sort of stepping back, having this distance of awe. And the idea of the Shor HaBor and the Leviathan, sort of killing each other or getting involved with each other, represents the idea of a person having both these styles of service to Hashem, both these types of relationship in one shot. So usually, a child to a parent or a parent to a child has the idea of love. Ava, they feel close together. A teacher and a child very often has the idea of awe. I don't mean fear because he's going to beat you up with a ruler with a stick. There's an awe and respect. So awe and respect is some distance. And the ava, the love, is closeness. The challenge is when your parent is your teacher. How do these two relationships work together in the classroom? So many parents will tell their child that while you're in my classroom, refer to me as your teacher. Don't say, Dad, got a question. Right? Have that distance because for whatever reason, because of the dynamics of the classroom, it's not really going to work very well. But usually you can't have both together. You can't have, or it's difficult to have love and awe together because they're two different ways of interacting. So he says that when Moshiach comes, we'll have both of them together. And that's represented by having both the Leviathan and the Shor HaBor together. So I'll just read it quickly through on the screen. It's on page 80, text A. Rabbeinu Bachai speaks about the feast of the Leviathan, explaining the significance of the Leviathan. He writes that the meaning can be found in the translation of the word, which means connection or cleaving. So Yaakov had 12 sons. First one was called Reuven, the next one's called Shimon, and the third son is called Levi. And Levi means to accompany, or like a lavai, a funeral, you accompany the person who's passed on. So Levi means to accompany. So Leviathan, you sort of twist the word a little bit, that it means the word to connect, to cleave. Accordingly, the feast of the Leviathan will be an experience in which we will we will attain great connection to Hashem, to be roused with intense love to Hashem. This is the feast of the Leviathan. Then he continues, a possible explanation as to the significance of the Shor HaBor. The prophet writes that the face of the ox in the heavenly chariot is on the left side, alluding to the idea that the ox represents fear and dread, which stems from the left side according to Kabbalah. So severity or awe, or gevura, is on the left. And that's why usually I think ladies wear right over left, and men usually wear the jackets left over right. However, many Hasidic people will wear their jackets right over left, because right represents kindness, chesed, and the left represents gevurah, severity. So you want the right, the chesed, to be over the, and on top of the severity. The kindness should be over the severity. So left represents severity or awe or dread, which again is distance. So the shor, this ox, Kabbalistically represents severity. So it emerges that the Leviathan represents love, while the shor haba represents fear. The notion of a feast, which these two elements come together, represents a synthesis of the two emotions of love and fear together. Right? And the reality is the love and fear are antitheses of one another. When there's love, there's no place of fear. When there's fear, there's no place of love. Right? Because one is coming closer, one is a certain distance. However, when it comes to serving Hashem, they can come together, love and fear in perfect synthesis. So that is the two ideas of Levias and Shor haba coming together, representing these two ideas. Now we have another idea, and this is from Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. He says that when Mashiach comes, we're going to go back to eating man, or at least there'll be an option to have man. Now, what does man taste of? It tastes of whatever you want it to taste of. There's a problem. If you don't know what good food tastes of, if you've only had peanut butter sandwiches your whole life, you'll eat man, you think of peanut butter sandwiches, that's what you're going to continue to eat. You don't know that there's sushi and roast lamb and chips and chocolate cake and ice cream and bubble gum, all the foods that there are. So it's brought down that in the desert, in the Midbar, Jews had everything they needed. They had manna from heaven, they had water from the Be'erish of Miriam, from Miriam as well. So how did he give charity in the Midbar? So I read somewhere that the people who were from originally from more affluent homes, who had a larger variety in their diet, would explain to the poorer people, and who originally came from poorer families, who would tell them, think of roast lamb, think of other delicacies and food. So what Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev says, that when Mashiach comes, at some point we'll be eating man, and that's what he says. But we won't appreciate the quality food. So we won't be thinking of, when we're eating the man, of quality food. So when Mashiach comes, Hashem's going to make us this meal with delicacies, this very good fish and this very good meat, so that we can acclimate ourselves to tasty food. And then when we eat the man, we can think of that tasty food, the shor and the Shor haba and the Leviathan. So let's have a look here what he says on page 81. It's on the screen. And he writes, God is disdained to make a feast from the Leviathan, the Shor haba, and he adds in wild geese. And the Yain Habashuma, this reserve wine. The truth is that the Jewish people will actually eat the manna when Mashiach comes, as they did when they left Egypt. So God makes a meal prior from these delicacies, so that afterwards, when they eat the manna, it will assume the taste of that meal. For the manna is able to assume any taste wished upon it, a taste one has tasted prior, just as it was during the exodus from Egypt. Okay, that's what he says. He says something else, that a lot of mitzvot that we've done is with food. In fact, every Jewish holiday is associated with food. Every Yom Tov has its delicacy, its food. But some food is an actual mitzvah. The first night of Sukkot, we have an obligation to eat some challah, some bread in the sukkah. The rest of Sukkot, when we do eat in the sukkah, it's a mitzvah. By the Seder, the first night of Pesach, we have obligation and a mitzvah to eat matzah. The rest of Pesach, we do a mitzvah of not eating chametz. So all the food that you eat, you're actually doing a mitzvah by not eating chametz. Shabbat, we have a halacha, mitzvah to eat Friday night, Shabbos day, Shalosh Shudas, Motzei Shabbat. There's a lot of food that we eat. And then there's customs. We've got the cheesecake of Shavuos, and the donuts and latkes and cheesecakes on Hanukkah, and the hamantashen and kreplach and Purim. So the whole year, we're always involved with food. So he says, people that make it their business to do the mitzvot with food, or to fulfill the food mitzvot, they will receive the reward by having the good food by this party. So let's see text C on page 82. And he says, this great feast is a reward for the Jewish people who ate food only to fulfill a mitzvah from Hashem, namely the meals of Shabbos, the festivals, and feeding of guests. And finally, you got from the Shalah, Rabbi Horowitz. He says, if a person is particular on Yain Nesach, so Yain Nesach means wine that a non-Jewish person has touched and possibly used it in their mind. They hold the bottle of wine and say, well, I'd like to offer this to my God. So he'll do a bit of idol worship while he's holding the wine, which in the old days was common practice. There's other reasons not to drink wine that non-Jewish people came into contact with, not to have intermarriage, or to help them to stop intermarriage. So people there's no issue just to interact on a professional level and on a certain social level. But once you start having alcohol involved, you're going to end up, your guard goes down. So either you're going to end up marrying a non-Jewish person, or you'll introduce your children to their children, and they'll end up possibly getting married. So non-Jewish wine, we do not drink, unless it's been pasteurized. If it's been pasteurized, then since that's not good enough wine to offer up on the Mizbeach, the altar in the temple, and we assume that the non-Jewish people will not want to offer up to their gods, so therefore that's not a problem. So if you have wine in a situation where there's non-Jewish people there, which very often if you have a party, a bar mitzvah or a wedding, there's waiters and waitresses there who are not Jewish, then make sure it says mavushal, pasteurized wine. Now some people are careful not only to not let non-Jewish people touch the wine, but also they shouldn't even look at it. If non-Jewish people looks at wine that's not been pasteurized, then we don't use it for Kiddush. So the Shalah, he says that if a person was careful not to drink such wine, then they would merit to drink from this Yain Havashuma, this wine, by this party. So I'll just read it on the screen. It's text D on page 83. I found in the book of Mitzvah Reasons, composed by Rabbi Nachum of Babylon, the following words with regard to the prohibition not to drink Yain Nesach. Okay, that's wine that a non-Jewish person touched. I have observed scrupulous people who no longer drink wine already from when a non-Jewish only sees it, even if it doesn't necessarily touch it, arguing that from the moment the non-Jew gazes upon it, it no longer brings blessings. And if you look at videos of the Rebbe by Fabrains, it's a public gathering, and if you had wine, maybe for grace after meals, for whatever reason, he had his wine in a brown paper bag, just in case there's a non-Jewish person present, which very often by these gatherings are non-Jewish people there. If they look at the wine, the Rebbe did not want to drink it, or at least make a bracha, like brachat hamazon, on it. So he says that if a person has this wine, is continued, this is the laudable custom for when the non-Jew sees the color of the wine or smells its pungent odor, he is drawn towards it, and we can assume that he wishes to use it for idolatrous purposes. So through the wine, so though the wine is still in the Jew's hands, it is now in the non-Jew's imagination. Do not question so superfluous that might seem tenuous for one who is careful with such matters, merits the yain havashuma, this wine of which the Talmud speaks. I am indeed surprised by those who live amongst non-Jews and are not careful with this matter. Right? So he says it's a very important thing. So I just want to summarize the class very briefly. Went through various sources in the Midrash, various sources in the Tehillim and the Nach that refer about this meal when Mashiach comes. They talk about the components, the menu of the Shor HaBor, the Levyasan, and the Yain HaMeshumah. Then we discuss, is it an actual meal or is it just a metaphor? And so the Maral says it's just a metaphor. Others say, and then maybe the Rambam Maimonides also says it's a metaphor. Other sources say, no, it's actual real. It's going to be an actual meal. And we have a certain peshara, a certain compromise over here. That could be there's two meals. You've got, some people say some sources are referring to the meal as the metaphor, and other sources are referring to an actual meal. But then what does this meal represent? Whether it's going to be a real tangible meal or whether it's just a metaphor, what does it represent? So the Maharal, he says it represents the reward for all our work throughout all the generations. And it's sort of the kickback and the reward for the suffering that we've had endured throughout exile. And then we had the idea from Rav Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, who says that the fish represents one way of serving Hashem. It's the more spiritually tuned way of serving Hashem. Because the fish is in the hidden world from the seas. What you don't see is not tangible to us. However, from time to time, a regular person sometimes gets this spark, gets this feel, gets this connection to Hashem. And that's represented by the fish. And the ox represents the daily grind, being involved in the mundane world, trying to spiritualize it, we came up with a new word on Shabbos, to godlytize it, to make it godly, to get it to synchronize with its true core, which is Hashem. But at the moment, the godly way of serving Hashem is more concealed, it's not so tangible. Godliness is not so tangible. When Mashiach comes, it will become one. The Shor HaBor and the Levyasan will merge together, and they will each bring out their qualities, but their qualities will become one. So the usually concealed godly way of serving Hashem will become tangible, like the Shor HaBor, which is the animal which is on dry land. Right? And we have that the whole time, but we still need to battle on. Getting to the diamond face, or the mind face, and hewing and getting out those diamonds. It's tough. You have to dig all the way down. It's back-breaking work. But we will get there and we'll have these diamonds. And that is by spiritualizing everything we have. So even when you eat a kosher sandwich, a kosher Danish, and you make the bracha, you're fulfilling the reason why you were created. You're fulfilling the reason why the world was created. And you're hastening the coming of Mashiach. So again, remember, every bite in that kosher sandwich is hastening the coming of Mashiach. So I hope it's clear. I'm going to switch off the recording.